Now that is a really standout effort, Eirik. It, that I, that's what I'm looking for right there at the end. Yeah, um, we've had a few entries that took on the D section. A couple of them had gotten it together and had really worked out what they wanted. There were a few others that had not quite completed the idea or had enough time, but evidently you did, and I really enjoyed the use of a bunch of different things, a bunch of different approaches. I really love the use of the Piccolo trumpet here, and some of the other scoring that we're going to talk about in this brass and so on. There is a lot of really good stuff to say about this. So let's start at the beginning. I'll just make a kind of an overall comment, and that is that in a lot of your scoring, there is definitely kind of an absence of slurs. Here I've been complaining about people slurring over repeated notes, like right in here and so on. Things like that. Basically dropping the phrasing of the piano onto the winds and strings and so on, where they don't quite work. Here, however, we're seeing a real like the opposite, which I've actually seen in a few scores recently and kind of commented on. And in a way, I'm just as worried, right? Because there are so many beautifully smooth gestures here. Dum, things like that, right? Dum, bum. I think that there are a lot of places where you could have used more slurs just to connect things a little bit nicer. Duh, right? And you could have even used, say, like a portato, like tenuto mark on both of these pitches, and then connect them with a slur. So you kind of get this kind of like almost sort of a pulsing kind of a sound that keeps things once again very, very smooth. And especially on here we're seeing a few sparse little slurs, or just actually one on this part here. If you're going to do it for one player, shouldn't you do it for all the players? Da, ta. Why should this one go ta, ta, and this one go ta? Right, so just really try to be more uniform, and definitely add some slurs. I mean, there's no reason why the strings couldn't be smoother right in here. And then going on later, which I'll probably comment on extensively, is that you've got these beautiful patterns scored out so nicely in the lower strings, and I think some in the lower winds and so on. And they don't have any slurs at all, right? So like there's no sense of like bowing over half a bar, down and then another half a bar up, or over each beam group and so on. There just really isn't. So it all just ends up sounding da 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 da, and which is a little mechanical, even with live players. All right, so just watch out for that, Eirik. Maybe you didn't have time to take care of that, or now you're saying, oh, of course I wanted to put slurs on this, and I forgot. I don't know if you heard me slapping my head just then. It's a pretty sensitive mic. So anyhow, that aside, I think that this is an intriguing approach here. Piccolo trumpet, of course, in B flat. And it is playing the pitches that you would normally see in maybe played by strings or winds as the top voice here. Now notice the scoring here. It is sounding down a seventh, right? How normally like B flat parts are sounding up a major second, right? So this one is sounding down a minor seventh from the pitches. So this is a sounding B above the staff, right? Which works in perfectly with the rest of the chord, right? Here we've got the oboes on these D thirds, and here we've got A clarinets sounding the same thing. Those are also D thirds. So A clarinets, man after my own heart. Okay, I see so many reasons why, A clarinet should be used in this piece. So good job, because of just the minefield of sharps that come up later. Now, some other orchestrators have looked at it and said, oh, well, you could just stick with a B flat and so on, because they're more common in a lot of community orchestras, and also a lot of the scoring later on in the piece could be done enharmonically, and there is some truth to that. But I am scoring at a professional level here, where the A clarinet is just as much at hand to the average player as the B flat. So why not use it if there are going to be sharps in plentiful sharps, especially as the piece progresses to more and more sharps until finally they're just double sharps upon double sharps. So anyways, so essentially I approve. It's interesting how you go upwards, right, with your thirds here as the trumpet drops down, right? Right, so sounding E, and this is a sounding G third, right? So be careful about like encapsulating your melody like this, where you've got a G third on either side. I mean, it does work here, but like just make sure that you don't change the context of the chord, right? Because we're seeing a lot of changing of the context, where where the note of a like a G6 chord becomes interpreted as E minor, right? Right, but where the E is just an added 6 to a G major chord, right? But so far as it's concerned, I like this. Adding the flute to the trumpet part is a very, very cool idea. And I mean, no reason why it shouldn't work. It's going to have a slightly sort of almost papery kind of a sound, combining those two pitches way up there, because the flute will be in a nice strong register, right? And it'll tend to get, even though it's a strong register, it'll tend to get overwhelmed by the trumpet right in there. But here you go diminuendo to piano, right? And there's really kind of a lack of any kind of dynamics, dynamic nuances on any of your parts except for the piccolo trumpet here. And then you've got a little bit of diminuendo at the end. So I would say, like, you're too good of an orchestrator to let that go, right? Why are you doing that? You can't not do that, right? Like, you have really put this page together with beautiful care, right? So where's the breathing, right? The breathing into the phrase and the pulling back out again. There's so much potential for that. And then there are a lot of errors in here that, just basically maybe you ran out of time to proofread or something. But, for instance, putting dynamic markings under rests where it's harder to read for the score reader and conductor rather than putting them under the entrance. And then here, there's no dynamic at all for the piccolo, right? So what pitch is that? All right, well, let's continue talking about the consequences of how you're scoring this, right? So this is really out of balance. So you're saying mezzo forte with a straight mute, then you're adding the flute underpowered, right? So this is not going to blend with the trumpet unless you have them playing at the same dynamic. You might even be a little louder for the flute if you really wanted to get a nice blend. But the players can blend. They don't need to have their parts marked up and down unless it's like really a case of brass section against wind section, which we see in a lot of scoring. But I mean, this is just so cool. I mean, I like the idea of the trumpets and working together, and the way you sort of back off on the wind accompaniment to just like essential pitches, harmonizing, right? It's just, I feel, really nicely done. Right? And then bringing in the snare drum in here. Yeah, it's interesting. The triangle sound sounded like a tambourine sound, so maybe you might want to watch out with your mock-up, right? Just make sure that you have the nice ting sound rather than a sort of a tsh kind of a sound, because you've already got enough white noise, right? I mean, that's essentially what is a snare drum, what is a cymbal sound. They are expressions of white noise, right? So you just have to be careful how much gets put in there. I like the jangles of the tambourine more than I like the I like the jangly sound of the tambourine more than I like the kind of the white noise sound of the tambourine. But one way or another, I agree with the triangle. I don't agree with the tambourine sound. So this is, yeah, I mean, it's nice. I mean, it's a really nice acknowledgement to Ukraine and the condition over there right now. Okay, so I'm sure that would be appreciated. So as this progresses, we still have to deal with issues about balance, right? So here we're stacking this up now. We've got violins, we've got first flute, and we have piccolo trumpet, right? So this is going to be a very intense kind of a sound. It's really going to have a lot of pressure at the top, right? So so how soft do you want things to be, right? First violin soft. There's no kind of dynamic phrasing in here, and there's no slurring either. Or like as I said before, like the portato approach, I think could work really nicely. But even in here, you have little groups of notes that could be beautifully slurred, right? And have a nice, like for instance, the fall down. That would be beautiful. It's beautiful slurred, bowing down, breathing down. Anyhow, not to get too caught up in that, but yeah. So here you're starting off with triple P, timpani, and then this roll right in here. This is a case where, like, what you're going to get here is crescendo to mezzo piano, unless you indicate otherwise, right? Or who knows, the timpani player may interpret this as maybe going a little bit bigger, but whatever they do, it's going to be controlled by the conductor, so you shouldn't worry about it too much unless you really did intend to go up above mezzo piano. So if you did, then you should mark it in. So if this is going to go mezzo forte, forte, fortissimo, then put it in. If it's just mezzo piano or just a little bit above piano, right? Some people feel that that piano has more nuances to it than just going, just increasing a little and then you're at mezzo piano. So whatever that is something that is up to the player, unless you have a real decision to go up a couple of degrees dynamically, right? So if you're going to go more than 1 degree in a situation like this, like a roll into a hairpin and out again, then indicate it if it's more than 1 degree. Okay. So yeah, I mean, this is just really the point at which I just would feel like there would be crescendo marks and that there would just be a much more, it just feels lifeless to me. It feels, reading this, it just, although it's beautifully scored, in both the winds and the strings and so on, and then this is lovely in the trumpet and so on. It almost feels like a paragraph without any punctuation, right? So I just feel there needs to be more organization of the material in here, right? So that's no, that is nothing against the scoring, but yeah. So just, the reality of it, let's say that you did that. Let's say you added some more nuances and things like that. With the piccolo trumpet on top, you're going to have a more trebly sound, right? So like that kind of sense of more romantic richness that you might be looking for. Since you don't really have any low winds, you don't have any low brass, maybe playing piano or pianissimo. You don't have that kind of support until right here. It's just going to have a kind of a more trebly sound. And once, as I said before, combining piccolo trumpet with flute gives a kind of a papery sound. You know what I mean? It like this, right? You can hear the paper crinkling. So it has that kind of quality of just the overtones of being a little bit brittle, right? All right, and then here you're adding piccolo on top. That's also going to increase that the sort of sense of the upper overtones being underlined. So if you are happy with that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the way that you scored this is really, really nicely done, I feel. I mean, of course, you have a situation here where your C trumpets are definitely going to, they're definitely going to play over the oboes if they oboes stay at pianissimo. And here you've got, you're saying plus. Don't do that. Just say consort, okay? Like, I mean, unless you really wanted the player to stick their hand in the bell, and then that's yet another. That is something that you would have to specifically ask for, right? So this should not be used in the way that it would be used for horns, okay? Like the plus signs. So just really write consort. If you went to the trouble of saying straight mute here, then just say straight mute there, right? And I think you could just say consort here, and then the player will assume a straight mute, right? So you probably don't need to, and you don't need to do this either. You don't need to have this big bracket, right? All you have to do is just say consort period, and the player will use that mute until you tell them to take it off. And that itself should be a different marking. You see, it's way better to do that than to add this line. See, what does this line do? It just adds a line to the eye, it adds another burden to the eye of the conductor, to the eye of the musician who's reading it in a part, right? But there's just another horizontal line for them to worry about. Better just to say that you want a mute on here and you want a mute off, or whatever the next instance of this player is. Now, we have an additional problem here, and that is you are assuming that your first trumpet player wants the hassle of playing an auxiliary. They don't. All right, it would be the same thing as asking your first clarinetist to play E flat, right? Which is that is a rookie mistake. I've even had that assumption before as well, embarrassingly. But the truth of it is that the auxiliary parts go to the third when there are 3 players. They go to the second when there are 2 players. Unless there is some case where, like, say, the second player really specialized in E flat, right? And there was, and they put their hand up for it, and they said, look, I'd like to be the third player in this concert so that I can do the E flat solo in Bolero, right? That would be the exception. But, like, in this case, you have got it wrong. Trumpet in C 1 and 2, and this is the third player playing the. But you don't need to put it below, right? Like some people would put Piccolo below the first and second flute because it's the third player, and so on. Don't do that. Just leave everything in pitch order in both instances, and don't assume that the first is going to play this Piccolo trumpet part. All right. Better to have the first on this, and the third have their moment to shine, which they'll specialize. Look, these third players, third flute, third flute, third clarinet, and third trumpet especially, third bassoonist and playing contrabassoon and so on. Like, they will be trying to get into orchestras, and they may have their auxiliary playing down to just the finest point, right? They might, because they've been trying to get a gig, right? They've been trying to, like, in most of the auditions will say, can you play this E flat solo? Can you play that bass clarinet solo? And so on and so forth. So they'll be really, really good at their auxiliary playing. And the same is probably going to be true of your trumpet players, right? So that third trumpet player is, they're going to be better at it possibly than the first or second. Okay? So, all right, and this is really fun right in here, this timpani solo. It feels like a solo. I mean, I think it'll work really nicely, and I like that forte piano roll and so on. And yeah, this little touch of horn. In some romantic scores, there can be a common dynamic for both staves, just like you would have in, say, a harp part or a piano part. Not in horn parts in modern scores anymore, right? So definitely don't do this, right? Because it just really looks like the third and fourth horns do not have any dynamics on their entrance. Okay, but I love the organization right in here. I think that's very, very cool. But once again, like, what is the trumpet player doing? So I just feel that there needs to be more dynamic markings and so on. But this is really cool, hanging on to this. Yeah, and this just really sort of cries out this, for some kind of slurring. This could be da da, and then don't slur into the repeated note da da. And And the same thing here, ta, ta. And then ta, ta. Don't slur into the additional F sharp, ta, ta. Sorry about my tuneless singing. All right, let's take a look at the next page. A pretty cool first page. I really enjoyed it a lot. Now, let's check out the next one. Okay, so here on this page, we start to run into some problems. Starting with this suspended chord right in here. It just isn't working. There's, I mean, you can sort of hear like this is a place where the harmony needs to be really clear to sort of guide our ear to the way that the way that the chord has settled over the D into like a kind of a 6/4 position, right? But just the way you've introduced some elements in here just really makes it kind of hard to for the ear to understand. For instance, you've got that F sharp sitting in there and the C sitting in there, and it just really kind of confuses things. Now I mean, you may be going for that, and that is perfectly fine. No complaints from me. But if that's the intention, but the reason why I feel that it might have been added by accident is that you've got an F natural right in here. Maybe that's also intentional, but like sounding B flat, right, against all of the places where that goes against the harmony, right? So yeah, I mean, maybe you didn't check the mock-up, or maybe you like those dissonances. I don't know. One way or another, you might want to leave in the comments below the video, or on Patreon, or on Facebook. So anyhow, just kind of letting me know about that. But I mean, as far as like dissonances go, they're kind of fun. But just as far as like harmonic clarity, it's just something that I felt the need to point out. Okay, now another thing is, you have been around the block with me by now on a couple of these, if I'm remembering correctly, and my brain isn't completely turning to mush. And so you must have heard me point out many, many, many times the problematic, realities of scoring low flute against a brass, against a more complex texture, right? And how little it actually contributes to the sound picture. This pitch right in here would have been beautiful on English horn. Absolutely gorgeous on English horn. And you could have used A2 flutes above to blend with your second violins. Now, right here, I do not feel like, with the way that you've got things structured with the dynamics, I do not feel that your strings should be pianissimo, because basically the brass just blasts them into oblivion. They don't exist, right? So you need some reversals here. Have your winds and your strings at a piano dynamic. Have them match in their force leading forwards. Okay. Now, as to your brass, I think that you could continue this approach. You could have pianissimo horns, and maybe piano trumpets and lower heavy brass and so on. But then, like, you just have to be careful about how you push it, because if you really push everything up to mezzo forte, which, by the way, we're missing some, like, what's the destination dynamic here? How big do these instruments get? And it's really strange the way that this sort of tails off and disappears. It makes me feel like you were possibly planning it to go further, but then you didn't get around to it. Or perhaps you were planning for the horns to sort of lead to the winds, in which case you should have had ended with dovetailing pitches that dovetailed into pitches in the winds, so that we'd feel the continuity, right? But the way that this is scored, it just really feels like the brass kind of comes to an unnatural end, and you sort of ran out of time, and then this is blank because that was the best you could do, right? So like I don't sense this leading into this with the way that it's scored. Okay. And here, I would say this is, if you intended this to sort of tail off, you shouldn't be scoring this A2, A2 trombones. Okay, all right. So to get back to our ongoing conversation about first trumpet and second and third trumpets, like so, if you do not have your first trumpet playing the auxiliary part, which it shouldn't, right? This will still be first and second, right? And then, as far as this goes, this could just be your third trumpet part, right? Because look, it's lower than all the other parts. So, so once again, so it's perfect as a third trumpet part. Just drop this down below, and throw this in third trumpet. And then when you get to this point, then just do the switcheroo. This be first, and that'll be second, and this can be third on a different staff. All right, or you could, I don't know. There are ways of scoring this all on one staff, but they're kind of messy. Anyhow, but it could be done. Could be done easily. Okay, so just as to the scoring itself, aside from a couple of peculiar notes in there, which by the way, like another objection is that they don't support what's going on in the clarinets, right? And aside from the just scoring a second flute part that can't be heard, I mean, how many times have you heard me say that in these challenges, right? You got to know better. You are so much better of an orchestrator than that, right? And it doesn't matter that everybody's soft. The minute you throw in the horns and the trumpets doing things, that's it. The second flute is gone. Okay, so this is a English horn part. So imagine that's an English horn part. You got maybe one or two flutes on top, and you've got the clarinets and so on that position, and you straighten out the peculiarities of the harmony and the horns and so on and so forth. This is a really nicely scored part. And I really love this. The bass clarinet kind of playing along with the bass trombone. It's a really wonderful combination. And I also like the little blips and blops of bassoons right in here. I really like the way that you are scoring the trombones. Here I would say I don't start with A2, start with a split voice. Okay, just like you have here. And here. Because it's just confusing the way that it's scored right in here. So yeah, just do split voice all the way through. And there are there are certain bars that could have just been a single done in first voice too. But I mean, just the way that this is all done, do it split the voice. And then this is really nice. And then don't say A2 at the end if you're dying off, if you're leading into the winds taking over, and the the central harmony and the lower strings taking the patterns. So right in here, like we can sort of see your meaning. Like you really have got this kind of like approach to those patterns. But I mean, how long can you continue doing that, right? How long can you sustain that? Doesn't it have to at some point give in to slurring? Yeah, I mean, I feel that like this is fine. This is a little on the edge, but then in the next page, as we'll see, when you use it to like state the wandering melody, I think that we start to lose the kind of character of what the music is trying to say, right? So yeah, so once again, destination dynamics. What are we getting up to? Is maybe mezzo piano here? This is strange. You have pianissimo, and then you have a piano above the. I don't know what this is. This little dynamic is in here. Now you're saying pianissimo on a high F sharp in your first horn, and then all the way up to G. We're assuming like maybe like piano right here. So I mean, those are some high pitches to be scoring very very softly. I mean, they're doable, but they're just not very comfortable. Not really, that in line with the harmony. There could have been a way perhaps of like having horns below and like one of your trumpet players playing this really softly above, or maybe like a couple of clarinets doubled by another instrument and so on, like the violas. So yeah, I mean, there are ways of doing this that that will work a little bit better than sending pianissimo all the way up to F sharp and G. But I mean, it's doable. It's like it's nothing to hugely worry about. But just be aware that that's not an ideal thing. Okay, about the only thing that I would say is possibly is maybe a little too heavy. It's kind of strange. You've got this looks like a copy paste error. Like you're marking piano in every bar, and then like not in the tuba. It might be a little heavy to have contrabassoon and tuba kind of hitting these octaves over and over again together. Maybe they could play together in the first, the first time, and then like you could lighten it up, maybe leaving out the contrabassoon at the end of the bar or something. I don't know. I mean, it just feels like potentially just a teeny bit too heavy, maybe, but maybe not. I like this right in here, where you have the tuba kind of hopping around. That's all good. And I like the way that the trumpets are working with the lower heavy brass, and I think it's just really fun. It's really nicely done. But yeah, I mean, going up to A here, realistically speaking, these trumpets are going to be forte, right? Or forte-ish. So if we're headed towards a forte with everybody, then, or maybe at like, I don't know, mezzo forte on a high A, you just are gonna have to work out what that balance is, right? But like the other, the other scoring in here is all good. It's really fun. All right, and then here, kind of going towards more like, like it really is very much focused on the scoring of the right hand in here, and there's very little going on with the left hand patterns, where here you had you were very prolifically scoring what was going on over the left hand. You had like 6 instruments involved, plus this kind of rock bottom low scoring. Now here you have you've lightened it up considerably, but you still have much more weight, right, on the upper parts and so on. So like, I mean, if you had wanted to firm this up a little bit with more active bassoons or bass clarinet, then it would have been a good place to do it. Okay, now here on this next page, you really see what I mean. Like, do you really want this to be, da 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 dee 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 da 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 da? Do you know what I mean? It just really makes it feel like it is kind of sort of bouncing along right when it should be at its most graceful, right? Which is why I feel if you set it up in the previous passage towards the end, more slurring, then it naturally leads to this more, more naturally, right? Especially like the higher you get with this wandering, this whole wandering idea, and then wandering down towards its end, like you just really want to take away the sense of scurrying as much as possible. And one of the other reasons why I sort of feel that this is possibly just you forgot to put them in is just because like right in here, this sort of transliteration of or transcription of the copy paste of the left hand part from the score, just feels unnatural when it's played détaché like that, right? Now, there's another problem right in here, and this is, I'm just wondering if you had forgotten that the double bass was an octave lower than the pitch is written, because what that ends up being a leap of a tenth rather than a third from C to E, right? Now, if this were to dovetail, which you do some dovetailing right in here, which is really nice, right? But like, like if you had wanted to dovetail on this, like you could have just gone, I'm trying to think like what would be a good way to do it. You could have gone A, E, A, G, like everything an octave higher. I mean, this is certainly playable by a double bass, right? And then right on the G, dovetail to the that open G with the first violins, and the first violins picking up and going G, C. So I think that this is totally possible, just taking it up an octave. There is going to be an imbalance in the quality of tone going from violins to double basses, but since you have your cellos tied up in this harmony here, then there's kind of not much else you can do besides change how everything is working right in here. I mean, maybe you could cover some of these pitches with harmonics in the double bass, and then have the cellos do it, like, or maybe like one like divisi cellos with the upper divisi cellos holding a pitch and the lower divisi ones connecting to the first violins much more naturally. So, I mean, there are ways around it. Now, the other problem here is like one of balance, right? So you've got this, like, what is going on in the score is the harmonized melodic part gets really soft behind the rising wandering line, right? So where's the softness? I mean, there isn't even a diminuendo in these bars, right? I feel that, like in the previous page, you should be winding down so that by the time you get here, it is pianissimo, right? And then everything is much more much softer, and then on top of that add a diminuendo so that so it dies out under the wandering line, and it's much more just much more convincing that way, I think. Now here, this piccolo part is just going to be invisible, right? This is very, very low scoring. And I mean, if everybody were pianissimo, it would have a better chance, right? But it would still not be ideal. It would be better for you just to do a C third here and just leave the piccolo out, or have it double the first flute. And I mean, it's a cool idea, like the scoring that you've got here, with the top divisi cellos and top divisi violins doubling the oboes. Then here you have the flute being doubled by the violas, and then the E is being this E is being doubled by the second violins, and then you've got like a G6 above that, which is not doubled by any of the other winds and so on. I mean, it's a neat idea, but just maybe a way of not scoring the piccolo on that E. I think just thirds, C thirds. You probably don't even need the piccolo at all. Just C thirds and the flute would be fine, I think. All right. And then going on here, we have this sort of pianissimo right in here, and here you got a crescendo under like a rest, right? So there's some proofreading that needed to go into this. Now right in here, like, just watch out for stuff like this. This is actually technically really easily playable because like the cellist can just use the open D and then finger the A on the G string and then climb over, and then you go F C, right? So it is totally playable. And then same thing, A flat on the G string, and then here open G, right? So it's all, it's just like that. It's just to an extent there's some carelessness here in the string part. So like when you score something like this, I kind of don't believe it, right? So like if you had thrown some attention into some of these other things, nice slurring and some other things that I already mentioned, then I would be more inclined to think, okay, well, he's aware that this is an easy double stop with the way that it's scored, right? But I'm since I'm not seeing the one, I'm not really sold on the other, right? And then the other thing too is I feel that there needs to be some kind of dovetailing going from here to there, and I'm also not convinced by the second violins going crescendo and then just suddenly dropping their weight out, just boom, immediately, right? So like you just suddenly get without the dovetailing in here, without any kind of joining up and dying out of the second violins right in here, then you get a very disjointed, blocky transition from this scoring to this scoring, right? So it isn't connected very well. So I just say really watch out for that. Now, this is all really fun in here, okay? I love the idea of using kind of bouncing timpani. I think that's very, very fun. I think it works really nicely. Now here, I wouldn't do this. And I'm seeing this in some other scores as well, as I'm seeing more and more parts, more and more C parts scored and so on. And that is sort of playing these octaves. Now, they are playable, but they're just... they're kind of, they're just kind of less than ideal. What I would do if you wanted this effect, rather than bring in the bass trombone right in here to thicken the lineup, all you got to do is just crescendo if you want things to sound fuller. You don't really need to just sort of add on another part, because this is also kind of annoying for the bass trombonist, right? So what might work better is if you were to go like this: tuba playing up to this G, then when it hits this G, the G octave is taken over by the bass trombone going bum 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 bum, and then on playing this G, right? Like playing this part right on this G, the tuba comes back in and goes dun dun dun, and then the bass trombone just plays this all by itself, bum bum, right? So I think that would be a way better division, like, just to split it up between the two players, rather than just, having these kind of etude-like octaves. So like whenever you score something in a instrumental part that really just seems like an etude, like an exercise for the instrument, try to avoid that. Just because it just ends up kind of having this sort of technical sound, and the player's focusing more on kind of nailing everything with an equal amount of like getting their embouchure perfect across all their registers, and getting like the intonation perfect, and getting like the articulation perfect, and all that other kind of stuff, which, of course, like for a stone cold pro, is not a big deal. It's not a problem, right? Most tuba players out there are probably listening to me say this and say, I could do that all day long. But that's not the point. It's, the point of it is that it's just really kind of more of a technical exercise, the way that you got it scored. I think splitting it between the bass trombone and the tuba is a kind of a better way to go. It's just gonna sound more even, and the two players playing off each other is just going to be more effective. So once again, that would be trombone up to here on this note, dovetail to tuba up to here on this note, dovetail to bass trombone up to this note. On this note, dovetail back to tuba, and then have bass trombone take this, right? So that would be a really great way of dividing this up. All right, I like the snare part right in here. I think mezzo piano is a little, I don't know, see, you have this diminuendo to piano. I almost feel like that it should just be a little warmer in here. Like maybe everybody should be mezzo piano, right? Or maybe just start off with a very stately piano, and then just like maybe more breathing into the phrases. I mean, here you got all these accents, right? Accents and piano, right? I mean, is that do you understand that is like a sort of a mezzo forte or mezzo piano attack, and just pulling off to like a softer note, right? I mean, that's a cool effect as well, but I mean, just kind of feel like you could get rid of the accents, and which after a while just start to sound a little overdone, and just like make the whole thing warmer and more smoothly connected. Like instead of accents, maybe have slurs, right, across some of these obvious places. Anyway, but that's kind of just my feelings about just making it feel more like the piano part, just sort of paying more attention to how Violina played it for us, right? It just feels closer to that. But it's still cool the way that you've scored it. Now, I felt that this was all done just very delightfully. All right, there's kind of a lack of dynamics right in here, but I mean there are ways of scoring this out, like adding some of the right dynamics and so on. I don't think you need two clarinets here, right? Just a single clarinet, and I don't think you need accent marks. I think staccatos are perfectly fine. Right, and I love the idea of these bassoons and the English horn working together. I think that's a really lovely idea. It's very, very cool. All right, but yeah, English horn in F. Yeah, okay. Okay, there's a few problems in here, though. Like, here you are, like, scoring I'm not really sure what this is. Whether this is supposed to be, like, divisi, like an octave where one of the pitches is normal and the pitch above is supposed to be a, a harmonic. It would have to be an artificial harmonic because it's on an F sharp, right? Or if you are thinking that the player would be fingering F sharp and reaching over and touching a node to make it an octave harmonic. All right, so that's not really a thing. Okay, so what you would want is like, forget about the way you've scored this. You would want a normal pitch on an F sharp and then up a perfect fourth. You would want the pitch of a B done as a diamond note head, and that would indicate I'm assuming that you mean this sounding pitch up here. So that's what you need to do here, and then the same thing an octave lower here, right? So just drop down to the lower F sharp, add the B above it as a diamond head note, right? And then just do all this, and then the same thing here, just down to the very low F sharp down there. Right, and I think that you would have end up with a much more beautiful, natural kind of a sound, and just as opposed to sort of trying to teach the players something new to do, right? Which they don't want to do, and they're not going to do, right? So just score it the normal way. All right, just check up on your artificial harmonic scoring, okay? That's the way to do it rather than this. Like, I mean, I have seen this kind of scoring used when the composer intends an octave natural harmonic, which is also pointless because you just write with a natural harmonic, you just write the intended pitch with the circle over it, right? And that's your natural harmonic. There's no need to make things too complicated. If you want something that can't be reached by means of a natural harmonic, then just score it as a perfect fourth with the intended pitch 2 octaves lower, and then a diamond note head up a fourth from that, because that's the touch 4 the touch 4 harmonic, right? Okay, and try to put your unless there's a bunch of vertical crowding, really try to put your dynamic marks under the entrance, okay, rather than at the beginning of the bar. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, this is all really fun. So here you've got these slurred contrabassoon notes. And the bass clarinet is not slurred, right? So, I mean, what is going on here? What is slurred? What isn't slurred? I wouldn't do this on a contrabassoon. Slurring down octave F sharps, right? Especially down to F sharp, the lower F sharp. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would rather you slurred the bass clarinet across its throat tones into the Chalumeau register, then you did this kind of slurring, had this slurring on the contrabassoon part, right? I just think that would work better. But I mean, maybe this is a place where you don't need any kind of slurring, right? I mean, if you here's where the kind of cascading, like you get the cascading octaves in the piano part, and I think that actually the lack of slurs, coming back to a lack of slurs, I think works really, really good here. But here I would slur this, da da ba 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 da da, right? So I think that add slurs here, get rid of them everywhere else. But and even in here, I mean, I'm kind of wondering whether or not you just would really need the slurs the way that you got them. And then of course triangle would work perfectly here, but what I'm hearing is once again the tambourine sound. But I mean, other than that, it's just a very cool, it's just very cool the way that you have scored this. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, really nice. I like the English horn being like an octave higher than it would be in relationship to the bassoons, like with nothing in between. I think that's really cool. And then bringing in the oboes here. So yeah, once again, no dynamics. What are the dynamics here? Like, is it all pianissimo? In that case, this D sharp and E, they're still possible on oboe softly, but they'll still tend to project. So yeah. And then, I'm not convinced by this inversion here. I think the top note, dun dun dun. I think you should leave the voicing of the chord the way that it was with I know that this sort of puts the top note out of reach, like on that kind of on a high F sharp and stuff. But there, you got clarinets. What are they doing? Right. I mean, I think that there are ways of revoicing this to make it a little bit more to the composer's intentions. I don't think that the revoicing of the harmony works here, especially not with these cascading F sharps. I think the F sharp needs to be underlined, right? Okay. All right. Now this is all really fun right in here. Yeah, a little tortuous. Like you've got all this vertical space. Score everything out on two staves. All right, then you don't end up with this kind of stuff. And when you consider it, look, this is like all, it's all identical, right? So I mean, you could have just said, 1 3 on top, 2 4 on the bottom, and just had a single staff, right? Now, you lose the kind of doubled sound in your mock-up, but I would prefer that. If you feel like that, if anybody feels like they have limited space and they want to score everything on one staff for the horns, it's all right. Okay, I mean just for the purposes of this of this particular exercise. But no, once again, back to the numeration. This should be 1 3 on top, and this should be 2 4 on the bottom. Okay, because it's like the first and the second are working together to play intervals, and the third and the fourth are working together to play intervals. So you would want them to double. You'd want them in their normal positions, and you want them to double, and it would just be that would be the normal position anyway, considering about like the pitch distribution of standard harmony in a horn part, right? So don't put 1 and 2 on top, and so maybe you meant that this voice would be 1 and 2, and this voice over here would be 3 and 4. Then in that case, I would grant it. But really, it's better to if you're going to have a condensed staff like this, put 1 and 3 on top, 2 and 4 on the bottom, and just get rid of the second voice, right? And then just have it, and then it would just like you could say A4, right? And then or you could say A2, 1, and 3, and then below it A2. 2 and 4, right? I mean, there's ways of doing it, but I mean, my preference is for you just to have two staves and identical parts in both staves, right? Don't be afraid of this, people. Seriously, do not be afraid of having identical parts, right? In two different staves of a horn score. It's not amateurish. There's nothing wrong with it. It happens all the time. All right? It just means that the horns are playing intervals together, just as you've scored it here. All right, so trumpet 1 in C, trumpet 2. Okay, so look, couple of things here. One is, like, you don't need this second voice, this kind of second voice rest going all the way through. Right, just write the, if you're going to write the number 2 above a part, just write the number 2 over here. Get rid of those rests. Nobody needs them. Just all that we need to do is just really read which number of instrument is going to be playing. Now, generally speaking, it is the first and second who double up on a staff, and the third who gets the extra staff below them, if there is going to be an extra staff. And if you rejig all of the trumpet parts the way that I suggested at the beginning, then that's what you would do here. Just like keep first and second on that staff, add their parts together, and then then you don't even have to worry about it. The third trumpet does not even come in till right here, right? Problem solved. Nice high trombones. I would definitely use a tenor clef here. Okay, and this is very cool, the lower brass. Just nice and rich, gutsy scoring, and, good use of lower lower winds and so on, medium, mid-range. I would say this should really be an English horn part, not a flute part, right? Haven't we had this discussion? Tell me, like, have you entered a score before that had parts that were too low, or did you miss me talking about it with other with other scoring. But look, you should know by now in these in these evaluations, and I'm seeing it crop up again and again, is like, there are moments where you can get away with scoring your flute low. There's not a lot in the way here, and if everybody were playing pianissimo, it would be perfectly fine. As soon as things start getting thick, and then you add the brass, forget it. That flute part is gone. Okay? So please, think of the time that I could be spending talking about something else that's really cool about your score, right? This is at best, is a English horn part, but like even at that, like there's so much power happening here, right? And there was no crescendo here. Suddenly you've got forte dynamics in your brass. What's the connection dynamically between this phrase and this phrase? Is there a build, right? Is there a crescendo here that we're missing? And then if you crescendo here, what happens to these beautiful, delicate harmonics? Would you want them to just be played as normal notes? Just so that they would have enough power to dovetail over into the brass once you got to right here? Like maybe start having normal notes rather than harmonics by this point, crescendo into this. By the time you get here, your winds are at forte, and this is tailing off, and then you're coming in at forte. Now, all right, now here, I've got to tell you, the way that you've scored your lower winds and your lower strings pizzicato, it is not enough. It is not enough to provide enough weight to be a meaningful partner to the brass here. You got a sort of brass section solely, right? And you've got all of these lower winds right in here, and they are basically doubling and reinforcing brass parts. They're not going to really be heard on their own, right? And then you got this flute part, which is going to be blasted out of the water. Nobody's going to hear it. So you are missing this chance by dedicating these winds that are invisible. You're missing the chance to make this pizzicato line much more firm, right? I would say, adding staccato, like really doubling the part rather than just going doink, 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 sort of almost like Morse code in here. Try to double up on this part, just following it up and down in its octaves, distributed over your lower winds, including maybe clarinet on some pitches. Like the clarinets could handle some of these pitches going forward here. Like with a clarinet, you can easily reach this low sounding D, right? So yeah, just maybe rethink the way that, because bass clarinet is just not making any difference whatsoever right in this situation here. Yeah, it's really just going to get absorbed by what is above it. Alrighty, so those are my thoughts about this. Now let's get on. Now that was up to this point has been the potatoes. Now let's get into the meat of this scoring. Just that wonderful crash of color and excitement. Oh, by the way, didn't the accelerando feel a little unnatural there? Maybe start it here and go over 3 bars, and then give us a destination of where you're going, right? Like if it's like mosso, right? Then poco allargando a tempo to mosso, right? Of the accelerando, or is it a tempo primo, right? To the beginning of the section, right? So just watch out. Just don't carelessly drop in an a tempo there, right? Unless there is some sort of reference to it. Okay, so the last page of this evaluation, I wish I could go yet another page and take a look at that exit, the outro. But, let's just focus on this part here. There might be some meowing in the background from my son's cat, who has decided that it is actually time for lunch right now, and I should stop talking to a wall from her perspective. And you're also going to hear a little bit of sounds like an airplane buzzing this neighborhood, or maybe it is somebody. Yeah, it's an airplane. So, anyways, but we'll manage to keep going. All right. So what is, we've seen the fire and the passion in the mock-up, right? But there is something that isn't quite right about this, right? There is something going on here, and I'll tell you what it is. Okay. All right. Now, apart from like kind of a lack of an articulation approach, right? So, are these staccatos? Are they accents? What are they, right? Okay. One of the problems is that there isn't a solid enough middle voice playing this idea. Like putting it in the strings, that's great, but it is not tough enough, right? You just have a tiny little bit of tenor trombone, A2, right? Just like right when they would have been their most useful. Just like aggressive trombones right in here. And horns, right? No horns. Where'd the horns go? Right? Just all those instruments would be so useful in sort of barking out that kind of central idea. So like even though like you really bring it out in a lot of different instruments, just sort of playing it in a harmonized way across several different ranges of the orchestra, the thing is that it's just not powerful enough under this trumpet melody. All right, so that is problem number one. Okay, problem number two is that there could just be just a touch more support of the melody. You would think, yeah, okay, well, like if my trumpets are playing fortissimo, they don't need any help, right? Yes, they don't need any help in terms of projection, but do they need any help in terms of like balance of color? Yes, I would argue that they do, especially with the way that you have so many instruments joining together in this, I mean, look, it's admirable the way that you saw immediately that this was a real integral, like part, just like a kind of a connected phrase. Though I would deduct points if I were giving points for you, like throwing in these rests, which like are kind of like the compensating notes of like the thrown in left hand parts that sort of have to jump around. Right, so like don't just ignore that. Just fill in, right? Fill in. Don't get phrasitis here, like with a phrasis interruptus. Don't get that. Don't get into places where you are throwing in rests just because you didn't connect it with the middle voice scoring of the left hand, right? That's what I feel is kind of happening in a lot of these scores. All right. And there's no need, like see how you have really filled in these bars, like just really rest and then there's no need for you to kind of stop here. Like this could be joining in with the da 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 dum, right, or it could be playing like a yoda do 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 underneath it, just like to give it a little bit of like rhythmic counterpoint to play against, right? All right. So yeah, and like the bassoons just don't have the power to really contribute, right? And then here, you've got all these intriguing little pitches in your double basses, and they're just not really coming through. And also, this is not the way that you should beam in 12/8. Okay, it's just too much counting, too much weirdness. All right, just go ahead. They will think in like. I would make this a flag note, right? So rest, flag, rest. And then here you could have a beam if you want to. Then rest, flag, rest, rest, flag, rest. All right? But don't do this kind of strange, it's just weird. It's just weird. And then they run into this. And then, their brain gets all twisted. And then what is the second voice doing in here? And then that's just not on, right? This should be rest, flag, rest. And then these could be beamed together and then a rest, and then this could be beamed together, right? But just don't put them under one big beam. Okay, all right. So that is part of it. Part of the like what is missing in this tutti, right? Just the other thing too is like there's always a risk in like hiking the that lower melody up higher and higher and higher to where it competes with, you know, the yata ta 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 ta, the repeated notes, right, that start to get interfered with. There's a risk that, like, not only will we lose the kind of the meaning of these pounding repeated notes up in the upper register, but we might also lose the thread of the melody, right? If this is kind of this is sort of just kind of going around and around. So, like, yeah, I mean, yeah, what's the dynamic here when the flutes come in, the piccolos come in, right? I mean, you were pretty good about marking, like, who's playing where, like atu, oboes, and so on. So yeah. So anyways, so those are my thoughts on this. You know, I thought that this was pretty enjoyable and really really fun. But you know, just like the horns are not doing anything, right? And they could be supplying that missing element of the, you know, he's really barking that out under the trumpets, right? And then you could use them to bring this together, you know, da 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 da, ba 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 ba. I really love the next page, by the way, which I had a chance to talk about it more. But look, I'll just leave you with that. It's a pretty long evaluation, but I was just enjoying myself so much. I didn't want to cut it short on any of these sections. So yeah, just, you know, make sure that your slurring is consistent, right? And I think this is kind of unnecessary, sort of chopping this into tiny little bits. I think just doing like one big slur, like just dividing the bar up into, you know, like down bow, up bow, down bow, up bow, and then like a little extra one because you have a repeated note, and then down bow, up bow, down bow, just over the entire first half of the bar, and then up bow and so on. You could do like you could also go like down bow, up bow, down bow, and then you get the up. For the up, you get the marcato note, things like that. But yeah, try not to have it so kind of chopped and changed like this. So yeah, and I love the, you know, this. I think that I'm just gonna increase this because my eyes are getting kind of old. Yeah, so here you have like tenuto marcato. I think just use marcato. Do you know what I mean? I think marcato is a noble articulation. I think it's enough just to. I mean, I know what you want here. You want a marcato with a kind of a drag to it, right? With a ritardando. But like you're kind of you are the person adding the ritardando there, not Barvinsky, right? So yeah. Anyway, so just watch out for some of this. And you know, other than that, I really, really enjoyed. Like, I think that it's just a really, really fun orchestration, and it really kind of shows signs of like growing craft and so on. But like, there are a few tools in your that should be in your box of tricks by now. Like, you know, in a massive fortissimo passage, not scoring low flute parts, right? Keeping the flute in its strongest register. Even this is too low, really, against the fortissimo of everything else. So yeah, so please remember some of those things that I've passed along as I've, you know, really seriously, you know, everybody watch the the all the materials, the pitfalls, the you know, the 12 common scoring errors. Next year I'm gonna have a checklist of people to go down, and it's gonna be on the entry form, right? You have to check the box that says I have read I have read and checked my score against the checklist, and if you don't check that box, the form doesn't go through. All right. So please check out all of the cautionary stuff, right? It just saves time on these evaluations, and, you know, especially for people who continue to contribute and so on and so forth, you know, need to be mindful of you know, the kind of accumulation of observations that we're making in these evaluations. But, you know, look, great score, like, you know, no critique about that. Just really just a wonderful way for me to start my day. So the cat is going to get really insistent in a minute, and I've talked long enough, except for to say thank you so much, Eirik, for you know, supporting the channel, for supporting the fundraiser, You've helped out some Ukrainian musicians in dire need right now, and thanks to everybody out there who's supported on Patreon or just supported the community through helping each other with helpful posts, observations, constructive feedback on their scores. It all makes a huge difference. I just think this community is. It grew really quickly when we first started back in like 2009 to when I started having more of a social media presence 2013, 2014. And that's when we started the orchestration challenges. And then over the past 7 years since then, 7 or 8 years, it's just grown maybe a little slower, but in a just a much more deliberate, much more disciplined way. And I really appreciate that. I'm so thankful to everybody's contribution, which is why I hope it won't seem undue for me to continue to ask for your support in helping out Eirik with some suggestions, with some thoughts, even just, just saying, I liked your piece, man. I think that all of that really, really just goes into the big bucket of what makes this such a special online community. So thanks all. And I will see you very soon with another evaluation.